Reasons for the church's power. The role of faith. People were very religious. They believed the church represented God and held the power to send a person to heaven or hell. Most felt united by their common faith. Power and wealth. Many nobles left land to the church when they died, hoping to gain entry into heaven. The church became Europe's largest landowner. Church wealth also increased through tithes, or church taxes. Center of learning. The church was the main center of learning. Church officials were usually the only people who could read and write. Rulers often relied on church officials since they were the most educated people. The head of the Catholic Church was the Pope in Rome. The Pope was regarded as the successor of St. Peter, leader of the apostles after the death of Jesus. Catholics believed the Pope had inherited the role of Peter in running the church. The Pope governed the church with the help of cardinals, bishops, and other church officials. The church controlled enormous amounts of land throughout Europe. The church also possessed monasteries, abbeys, and convents where monks and nuns spent their lives devoted to prayer. Two Christian thinkers who had a great influence on the Middle Ages were St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas. St. Augustine, 354 to 430 CE, lived at the time of the fall of Rome. In The City of God, Augustine asks why God is letting barbarians destroy the Christian civilization of Rome. He concludes that no earthly city, like Rome, can last forever. Only the city of God in heaven is eternal. Because our understanding is limited, he said we must put our faith in God, who will reward us in the afterlife. St. Thomas Aquinas, 1225 to 1274 CE. He lived 800 years after St. Augustine. His most famous book, Summa Theologica, provided a summary of Christian beliefs. Aquinas wrote at a time when Muslim and Jewish scholars had just discovered lost works of Aristotle. Some Christian scholars felt such pre-Christian thinkers had no value. Aquinas showed how these works by Aristotle were compatible with Christian teachings. Aquinas said that God had given man the power of reason to help him explain and interpret the world. Therefore, we should trust reason as well as faith. Aquinas also believed in the existence of natural law, universal laws independent of any laws passed by government. These laws are based on reason. Our reason tells us what we must do in order to do good and to avoid evil. Aquinas believed that we can use our understanding of natural law to evaluate the laws of governments. If a human law conflicts with natural law, it is not a law, and we do not have to obey it. Quote, laws of this kind are acts of violence rather than laws. Quote. Aquinas believed that citizens even have the right to remove rulers who continually enact unjust laws. Although Aquinas thought a ruler's power came from God, he felt this power came from God through the people. Let's apply what you've learned. Why do you think the teachings of St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas were important to the people in the Middle Ages? The Crusades. The power and influence of the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages can be seen in its ability to carry out a holy war against Muslims. For hundreds of years, Christian pilgrims had regularly visited Jerusalem, where the sacred events depicted in the Bible were believed to have taken place. However, in the 11th century, the Seljuk Turks took control of the Holy Land and drove out Christian pilgrims. Call to free the Holy Land. In 1095, Pope Urban II received a plea from the Byzantine Emperor in Constantinople for help against the threat of a Muslim invasion. Shocked and angered at the possibility of Constantinople's falling to the Muslims, Urban II called on all Christians in Europe to unite and fight a holy crusade, a war to recapture the Holy Land from its Muslim rulers. The Church promised salvation to all who participated. The word crusade meant War of the Cross. Crusaders fought under the banner of a red cross against a white background. The Crusaders brought rulers and nobles from different parts of Europe together in a common cause. Pilgrims, wives, and children of many knights accompanied the Crusader army on its long journey from different parts of Europe to Constantinople and then southward to the Holy Land. Many of the participants died of hunger or disease along the way. Several crusades were fought over the next 2 centuries. Although the Crusaders never achieved more than a temporary control of Jerusalem, the Crusades had many important effects. New ideas and products. Europeans had greater exposure to new ideas, such as the use of zero in mathematics, and to foreign products such as silk, rice, spices, coffee, perfumes, cotton cloth, raisins, and glass mirrors. Increased trade. The European demand for foreign products, like spices, sugar, lemons, and rugs, eventually led to increased trade with the Middle East as well as with other parts of the world. Growth of intolerance. The Crusades led to the Christian persecution of Jews and Muslims, as well as to Muslims' persecution of Christians. The later Middle Ages. During the later Middle Ages, Europe underwent gradual changes. Trade first revived when merchants displayed their goods at fairs, often inside a castle's walls. Trade slowly increased, and cities along trade routes grew. The Crusades increased interest in luxury goods from the East. A new merchant class arose in the towns. Merchants and craftsmen organized into powerful associations known as guilds. New inventions like better watermills, windmills, and mechanical clocks improved life. Cities like Bologna and Paris founded the first universities. Throughout the Middle Ages, important towns had often competed to build the largest church or cathedral. The later Middle Ages saw the introduction of a new art style. The first Gothic church was built in France in 1231. Its pointed arches, high spires, and beautiful stained glass windows were designed to give worshippers the feeling that they were being transported to another world. Let's take a look at these two photographs. What characteristics make these two buildings alike? How are they different? English political traditions. In the Middle Ages, England developed traditions of liberty and limited self-government that were unique in Europe. The Magna Carta. In 1215, the English nobles, known as barons, rebelled against the taxes and forced loans being collected by King John. They were helped by the church and towns. John was forced to sign an agreement promising not to take away any free man's property or to imprison any free man without following procedures established by the laws of the land. The Magna Carta guaranteed all free men the right to a trial by jury, and further forced the king to obtain the consent of a council of nobles for new taxes. Parliament. Later, English kings summoned nobles and representatives of the towns to grant them new taxes. This led to the origins of Parliament. The waning of the Middle Ages. Starting in the 12th century, life in Europe began to change. The Crusades brought new goods from the East to Europe, stimulating a rebirth of trade. They also weakened the Byzantine Empire, contributing to its later collapse. New trade led to the growth of towns, the development of a middle class, and the greater use of money. Instead of performing services for their feudal lord, many people began using money to pay the lord instead. Other events that contributed to the end of the medieval world were the Great Famine, the Black Death, the 100 Years' War, and the Great Schism. The Great Famine, 1313 to 1322. Unusually heavy rains led to flooding. Eventually, crops spoiled and livestock drowned in waterlogged fields. The result was the Great Famine. Farm animals needed for work were slaughtered for food, and seed grain was eaten. This shortage of grain increased grain prices by more than 6 times. Millions of people died from the famine. Many questioned the church why this catastrophe was happening. The Black Death, 1347 to 1351. The Black Death, also known as bubonic plague, occurred only 25 years after the Great Famine. Rats with fleas carrying the disease entered Europe from Asia on trading ships. Between 1347 and 1351, 25 million people, about 1/3 of Europe's population, died in this epidemic. People were buried in mass graves without receiving any blessing from the church. Some blamed Jewish people for poisoning the wells. Others claimed the plague was God's punishment for sinful living. The Black Death created a labor shortage in Europe. Large numbers of peasants escaped from serfdom when landowners and towns needing laborers offered them freedom in exchange for work. The 100 Years' War, 1337 to 1453. The 100 Years' War between England and France broke out when the French king died without an heir, and the King of England claimed the French throne. This long period of warfare slowly strengthened royal power in both countries. Instead of relying on a feudal army based on the service of his nobles, each king developed a standing army of foot soldiers. New weapons emerged, such as the English longbow. Later, gunpowder and cannons were introduced from China. Knights became less important in battle. Both England and France also developed greater national feeling and loyalty to their kings. Joan of Arc, a young French maiden, rallied French troops around the heir to the throne. She turned the tide when she successfully drove the English out of the city of Orleans and crowned the new French king at Rheims Cathedral. Later, Joan was captured and burned at the stake by the English as a witch. But within 20 years after her death, the war was over. The Great Schism, 1378 to 1417. The Pope often clashed with Europe's secular or non-religious rulers. Kings sought the right to appoint bishops who controlled vast areas of land. They also wanted to try priests in royal courts and to tax church lands. The Pope resisted these demands. In 1305, a Frenchman was elected Pope. He moved the papacy from Rome to Avignon in France, where it fell under the French king's influence. In 1378, an Italian was elected Pope, who decided to move the papacy back to Rome. French cardinals claimed the election was unlawful and elected a French pope to keep the papacy in Avignon. This schism, or split, greatly weakened the church's authority. A church council made matters worse by electing a third pope in 1409. Finally, a new church council deposed all three popes and elected a single pope in 1417. But the church's prestige was greatly weakened.